And yes, it occurred.
Like we're on trees? Or?
Yeah, okay. So, because of supply chain bottlenecks. That's what I'm talking about. There was a labor
Policy
shortage
choices were
because
made.
of COVID.
Policy choices
and then there
were
was
made.
this thing called greedflation, which was called a left-wing conspiracy theory. But then we saw record returns for corporations.
What this setup signals isn't just a debate between two political commentators, it's a collision between two fundamentally different approaches to public discourse. On one side, a commentator grounded in data, policy analysis, and measurable outcomes. On the other, a familiar style of political messaging built around deflection, partisan framing, and rhetorical confidence. And this contrast matters, because panels like this aren't really about who wins a verbal exchange. They're about what kind of information reaches the public and how responsibly it's delivered. When a discussion is framed as a head-to-head, viewers are often primed to expect spectacle. But the real value comes from substance, evidence, clarity, and a willingness to engage with uncomfortable facts. Here's the part people often overlook. Democratic discourse depends on more than airtime. It depends on balance. When one participant relies on past blame or generalized talking points, and another brings current data, economic indicators, and verifiable research, the difference isn't ideological, it's methodological. That distinction speaks directly to democratic norms. Healthy democracies rely on informed disagreement. They rely on participants who can explain why policies work or fail, not just who to blame, and they rely on media spaces that allow facts to be heard without being drowned out by performance. So as this panel unfolds, the question isn't whether disagreement exists, disagreement is essential. The question is whether the conversation advances public understanding or obscures it, whether it strengthens accountability or weakens it. And that's the lens worth watching through.
If you have a problem with the economy, it's the other guy's fault, the last guy.
We inherited a mess. Affordability, but you can call it affordability or anything you want, but the Democrats caused the affordability problem, and we're the ones that are fixing it.
Remember when Trump said this about his tariffs back in April?
Maybe the children will have $2 instead of $30, and maybe the $2 will cost a couple of bucks more than they would normally.
Well, it is officially doll season, and a growing number of Americans are actually struggling right now in this economy. A new Fed survey found more Americans say that their finances are, quote, much worse now than they were a year ago. And they don't expect it to get any better in the next year either. Trump's approval rating on the economy has plummeted 15 points since he's taken office. And despite the president saying that the economy is great, he's now giving a $12 billion bailout to farmers who were hurt by his own tariffs. Justin Amash said this, a former GOP representative. He said, Trump swipes money from taxpayers to bail out the farmers who were harmed by the tariffs that Trump himself placed on American businesses and consumers. This is the Trump economy. Senator Flake.
Can't argue with that. On tariffs, tariffs are inflationary. That has been a GOP article of faith forever. And it's true. And we're finding that out. There's been some time to get there, but we're there, certainly. And I think that next year it'll even be worse unless there's some reversal on tariffs. We've seen bits and pieces shift, certain sectors exempt and certain countries exempt, but overall it's starting to bite. Consumers are paying more and they're feeling it. Yeah, and you can't tell them otherwise.
Well, yeah, and Trump is not only trying to tell them otherwise, but is also not acknowledging what his own actions are showing, which is that he's bailing out farmers, rolling back some tariffs on food items. Those seem to be clear acknowledgments that the tariff policy has hurt Americans.
Well,
this is where a familiar pattern becomes impossible to ignore. When discussions turn to present-day policy outcomes, one strategy consistently appears, shifting the focus backward, rather than addressing the substance of current economic conditions. The conversation is redirected toward former administrations, past presidents, and historical blame. It's a rhetorical move that feels active, but functionally avoids engagement with what's happening now. Here's the part people often overlook. Whataboutism isn't an argument. It's a substitute for one. In democratic debate, accountability works in real time. voters aren't living under past administrations. They're responding to present policies, current prices, and today's economic pressures. When a commentator leans heavily on historical comparison without addressing current data, it subtly reframes responsibility away from those currently in power. And that contrast becomes clearer when different styles of argument are placed side by side. On one hand, there is an approach grounded in measurable indicators, inflation figures, employment data, consumer debt levels, and independent economic analysis. On the other, an approach driven more by narrative continuity, reinforcing a familiar storyline rather than interrogating new evidence. The difference isn't ideological, it's evidentiary. This matters for democratic norms because public trust depends on relevance. Citizens expect leaders and commentators alike to respond to the conditions they are actually experiencing. When political conversation becomes anchored in perpetual retrospection, it risks disconnecting public discourse from lived reality. And there's a psychological layer here as well. Deflection often emerges when the present is harder to defend than the past. By shifting the timeline, pressure is relieved, at least rhetorically, even if the underlying issues remain unresolved. So this moment isn't just about tone or style. It's about whether political commentary is serving clarity or clouding it, whether it's helping citizens understand policy consequences or simply offering familiarity in place of explanation. That distinction is what shapes informed civic engagement.
I think on the agriculture piece, there's a couple things going on. One, right up front, Trump said the tariffs were going to cause some short-term turbulence or pain for some sectors. He acknowledged it. Agriculture has felt that a little bit, the row crop guys especially, but of course they solved some of that with the deal they cut with China. So actually was in.
Did they solve that? Because I mean, I don't think we
soybeans?
would.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think we would be talking about a $12 billion bailout.
Well,
A, and B, the amount that China has bought is not anywhere near what has been promised.
Okay, so they cut a deal with China, and they're in better shape today than they were when we didn't have a deal with China. So that's number one. Number two, I was in Texas Saturday night with the Texas Farm Bureau, spoke to a lot of farmers down there. It was interesting. There were some people that absolutely had concerns. In fact, I talked to one guy who was going to the White House meeting today, and they were glad to get invited to that. I think they feel like what the president's doing on the ag thing is responsive to them. They have concerns, not just tariffs. They're a little worried about the Argentinian beef issue as well. They threw that out. So, yeah, I mean, he's got some issues to work out. But overall, if you look at the Fed survey, people are happy and excited about the job market and the labor market in the United States. That's a good thing. And if you talk to Scott Bessent, he'll tell you that they think in 2026, we're going to see a boom in jobs and growth in this country thanks to some of the structural changes they made this year. So they're expressing optimism and exuding optimism, and that's what they got to do going into an election.
There have been more than 1 million jobs lost so far this year, a number that basically rivals the pandemic time. So there is a picture of the economy that we're not getting from the federal government numbers because those numbers are by and large not coming out. But from private sector payrolls, jobs are being lost right now, right at this moment.
We've seen actually for the first time in years, actual job losses month after month, revisions showing private sector job losses. And I think that is driving a lot of anxiety. And it comes at a time where the facts are that the tariffs are causing middle-class families, working-class families, to pay more money. They're $1,700 estimated by the Yale Budget Lab of how much families are paying more for the tariffs. And so I think what's really odd is that the president promised that inflation would come down on day one. He'd get rid of it. And instead, he went on this policy that I agree is just different from what Republicans have supported for decades, which is raising prices on people. And of course, the whole issue with the bailout of the farmers is if we didn't have these actually counterproductive tariffs, you wouldn't have to take taxpayer money to actually bail them out, because China's response on the soybeans is because of the president's tariffs policy.
I know all of human history started in January of this year, but I could take you back 4 years when input prices for agriculture, from fuel to materials to you name it, went through the roof. I know you know a little something about it because you worked under Joe Biden when it all happened. So these farmers, they're in a 10-month period here with Trump, but they just came out of a 4-month period where they were dying under the inflationary and affordability crisis caused by Democrats. They support this president. They like what he did today, and they're going to give him a little latitude to get out of the mess.
I don't think that's accurate when you hear from farm bureaus.
You don't think it's accurate that inflation happened under Biden?
I'm sorry, Donald Trump talked about, we definitely had inflation, but Joe Biden didn't pass tariffs that actually, with his own policy, actually increased prices for people. And I think what's really stunning is that 1 year in, Donald Trump's approval on economics is actually now worse than Joe Biden's. So all you want to talk about Joe Biden, the fact is people hold Donald Trump responsible because it's his policies. They're adding to the burden on families.
When political conversation becomes a contest of gotcha moments rather than an examination of facts, the audience is left entertained but not necessarily informed. In a healthy democracy, the strongest arguments don't need applause lines. They stand on verifiable data and transparent reasoning.